Porter and Hewenden.
Wait, give us a sec. Now you're good.
His lengthy rail career began as a lad porter in Hewenden, a shunter in Richmond and Collinsville, where he graduated to guard but was unable to act until he was 18 years old, then to guard at South Brisbane and Main Junction. He joined the ARU, the Australian Railways Union, and the Australian Labor Party early in his working life, and he was one of the first yardmasters appointed at Main. I had put some of this down in a obituary that had been requested by the retired Labor Party, that they put out a journal, and I submitted this, and they're going to send me a copy of the journal. So they wanted to know about him, yeah. So I won't read all of this because some of this will cover a lot of the questions that you might ask me, but Trevor was elected president of the ARU and served in both Pat Dunn and Les Crofton's terms as secretary until his retirement. He was the first paid president of the union, and I can remember being at Branch Council when that come about, when the similar things that will happen all the way through a union. Things change. The southwestern division was closed up and amalgamated with the southern division, and that's how come he become a paid president, as well as looking after the southern the southwestern division. That was all a huge love of his life, was the workings of the railway, and particularly the workings out in the west. Yes, he had a love affair with the west, and he was a natural for that. What else can I say? He was a very able and capable chairman of fiery branch council meetings and what have you. There was some exciting times, and I can remember walking away after a branch council meeting that was where the amalgamation with the AP, whatever they call them, the bus division.
Yep.
That was almost in collapse. They walked out and things looked like disaster. And I went away from that meeting and I thought, well, how are we gonna solve this? But eventually it all come about, and the bus division was amalgamated and everything. It all looked doom and gloom then, but it come good. And I can also remember when I was a branch councillor being in the office and watching a video of a steam locomotive in America going up a big hill. And present were members of the AFULE, senior people with the AFULE, Les Crofton, Trevor, myself, and quite a few others. And we were well engaged in amalgamation with the AFULE at that time. But unfortunately, it was another thing that fell apart and has never happened to this day. But they were all very interested in that big steam locomotive. And I'll get on to this too, because I've got a treasured keepsake here that Trevor gave me. It's still got his name on it, Campbell. He regularly contributed to this type of thing, this American Train magazine. And matter of fact, whenever we were in National Council in Sydney, there was a bookshop there that he always went and bought railway. He took me along to it, and he always bought a book whenever we went to National Council. Because I'm a lover of country music, he bought a copy of this and sent it to me. And it's how the rails got their rhythm, and it's very interesting, and it all gets down to Jimmy Rogers, who was the singing brakeman. And of course in America, a brakeman was a guard. Here's a guard. In America, he was a brakeman. But Jimmy Rogers was the father of country music, and certainly there is, great article, lots of steam trains and what have you, and very treasured for me, and that's something that I got off Trevor.
When did Trevor first become the president? What year was that in?
You'd have to look at the history from memory. I was a branch councillor. And Pat Dunn was the secretary, so it was in Pat Dunn's term, and it was probably about, I'd have a guess, 89?
89? Yeah.
Something like that. But, records will show exactly when it was. But
So, a lot of big things happened in the 80s and the early 90s. And so how did Trevor deal with that?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of things happened. Of course, there was 38-hour week campaign, with Joe Bjelke-Peterson. That was a big campaign. Probably one of the biggest things that Trevor was involved with was Les Crofton was on leave, and the Labor government at the time wanted to close some lines out in the west, and Trevor wasn't very happy about that. So he was in a position that he could do something about it, and he arranged a tour of the lines out west with David Hamill at the time, who was the treasurer. And they went out there doing that, and he finished up. He was called back here, and he appeared on the TV, and yes, he took up a strong fight to retain those lines out there, and the fact that some of them are still open is attributed to his. That was probably one of the biggest fights that he had, and the most public, where he was on the television and all that. What else? The memory's not that good. Getting too old.
So good.
That's Trevor used to say to me, "We're the oldest bodgies in town." Him and I. Yeah.
Did he have any opinions on, the new Labor state government, maybe the ACTU and the Accords or anything like that?
Yeah, he had strong opinions, and although he was a strong Labor supporter, if they weren't towing the line the way he thought it, he'd certainly let them know. No, and he had he was involved in so many things. He was in pipe bands, and he was in. I often remember him talking about these things and that he was in, but I never ever took notes of it. But he was involved in a lot of things throughout society and what have you, and. He was well spoken on a lot of things.
So, do you anything in particular that you remember him saying about anyone or any policy changes or anything like that?
Sort of got me on the spot.
Yeah, I know.
He particularly didn't like some of the politicians, particularly the Bjelke-Peterson and Don Lane. He didn't like him. No, I got a bit of a memory blank.
Okay. Did he ever share with you any of his fears on becoming the president?
No, I think he was a real natural president for the union. He handled you know, chairing a branch council meeting is not an easy thing, and he handled it very, very well. I can vividly picture him one time bursting into laughter on something that I'd done. we had a branch council meeting, and there was long discussions about the toilet facilities on the Sunlander. And some of the people, and at this time there was women in the branch council and that, some of the people weren't aware how the toilet system operated on the train. And I said, they haven't got a collection area on the train. The toilet, the chute goes straight down onto the railway tracks. And I said, can you imagine the Sunlander going over a bridge and the fettlers working, and underneath the bridge they're having their lunch. Somebody uses the toilet and bang, down comes a big King William III. Well, Trevor burst into laughter and the whole place burst into laughter with my referral.
I've heard stories about people who've had that happen to them. So, what do you think was the most important event that Trevor witnessed and was a part of as the president?
Probably the thing that Pat Dunn's retirement, and he had a strong working relationship with Pat Dunn, and I think when Pat Dunn retired, he missed him, but he also had a good working relationship with Les Crofton, but probably not quite the same, because Pat and Trevor come from the same calling, you know. But as for a huge thing that would have happened, there was that many things that happened. I can't think of anything that really knocked him about. You know, a lot of things happened, and you know, the closing of the Ipswich Railway workshops, you know, and it's even spread now to Rockhampton and everywhere, but at that time, I can remember on branch council, the branch councillor from Ipswich was, his name escapes me. Noel McCool. Noel McCool was the councillor, and when the workshops was being discussed that a closing, he made a suggestion that the workshops be made into a museum. And he mentioned that at branch council, and he'd mentioned that he'd made a submission to David Hamill about it. And it eventually come about, but he didn't get the recognition he deserved, because he was the first bloke that suggested that the Ipswich Railway Workshop should become a museum. Another little memory thing. A few other people might think of that and remember that.
So he's the one to thank for the museum there.
Well, he was the first one that suggested it, and eventually come about, but he didn't get the accreditation for it.
If Trevor was here today, what would you imagine he would have said to future young members of the union, or like RTV youth members or future union activists, what they need to be, what they need to do and what they need to be worried about?
Well, I think if he was here today, what we're doing now, technology and this type of thing, would be right up his alley. He was an eloquent speaker, and he would be able to sell anything. He would have been able to sell the message to members, to anybody, using this modern technology. It would have been right up his alley, and he would have loved every minute of it. and he would have advocated using it, to the fullest.
And did he ever share with you, before he left the position, what he saw the future of the union and the labour movement was going to be like?
Sometimes he didn't like the way things were going.
No, that's okay. That's what I want to hear. It's history.
He was a stickler for the old style unionism, and particularly he didn't want to hear any lines being closed anywhere or anything like that. He wanted the rail industry to keep expanding, and sadly, and of course he would never been in favour of selling off the rail, the horizon and all that sort of thing. He wouldn't have been in favour of that. He still wanted it to be Queensland Government Railways through and through. He had a very good report with railway officers, including Vince O'Rourke was the CEO. I can remember being in the old building and having Christmas drinks with a lot of railway officials that had a lot of respect for Trevor, and even though they used to argue across the table and everything, they'd come around, we're good mates and have a Christmas drink and what have you.
Okay. Well, let's do you. Oh, we've got you? Why not? So how old were you when you joined the railways, Lyle?
Me? Yeah, I was 14 and a half. I joined the railways on 19th of March 1956. 14 and a half years old as an apprentice trimmer.
So what does an apprentice trimmer do?
Apprentice trimmer does upholstery, all the seats and carpets and roofs, the canvas on the roofs of the old wooden carriages, and leather work, canvas work. We done a lot. And I must say the last apprentice I trained is well retired. That's the only thing I'm sad about, I suppose. I left Ipswich in '73 to relieve at South Brisbane as a trimmer for a week and never ever went back. I finished up applying for the job there when the fellow who I was relieving retired, and through ill health, and then I transferred to Maine when South Brisbane closed, and I retired at Maine, but never ever trained another apprentice. So all the skills that I got will go with me in the box. I've still managed to keep my skills alive. I've been, I've retired in 2003, and I've still got the sewing machine under the house and still keep busy. Family and friends won't let you retire.
And when did you sign up for the union?
Well, that's the interesting story. I was involved in the union even when I was an apprentice, but it wasn't the ARU then. It was a craft union that most of the people were in. And I used to go to union meetings and what have you then. And I was still in the craft union when I went to South Brisbane. And there I met up with a few of the staunch ARU people that operated at South Brisbane, and they convinced me to resign from the Vehicle Builders Union and join the ARU, which I did. And shortly after joining, then Bob Bradshaw got me to attend the meeting, and we used to meet you had to go up the stairs and used to have the meeting there on top of those stairs, and the Labor building there. We had the first meeting there. And and of course then I go into the meetings, and I finished up chairman of the meeting and carried on from there and there. So that's how the union all come about.
So what was your experience in the railways before you became, you know, a bit of a delegate or, you know, leader pretty much?
Yeah, well, once you become a delegate and you become involved, you know, there's a lot of, particularly when I went to Maine, I was forever fighting with management and, you know, yeah. I still dream about it today, you know. I'm still fighting with them over the electric shed and some other things and that. You still dream about it and you think, and you wake up in the morning and say, what are you dreaming about that rubbish for? But it was all very important at the time.
So, do you remember any big blues that you fought or you started or instigated? You know, going out the gate for anything, or, you know, even being a shit, getting work to rules and all that sort of stuff?
The LCC meetings we used to have, yeah, I don't know. I suppose I can, yeah, it's part of the history, I suppose. Those LCC meetings, I had a lot of arguments with the electric shed over, they were getting driver's seats done, buying driver's seats in, and whereas we could repair them and build them there, and I didn't like that. And I kept bringing it up at LCC meetings, and eventually the boss of the electric shed was unavailable, and Brian Lease was the engineer, and he was acting in charge at this LCC meeting. And I wanted some figures of how much money they were spending on driver's seats that they were buying in and what have you. I couldn't get them off the previous bloke, but he was prepared to give them to me. And I said, well, I want the organiser to be here. He said, all right. So I made arrangements for the organiser to come down, and he presented these figures to us, to Bill and I, and it was a significant amount of money that they were spending. And I had found out that that the people that were supplying the seats there was a bit of graft going on. They had some holiday units down New South Wales coast, and some of the staff, when they were on their week off, were going there to stay in these units, and in return they were making sure they were getting plenty of seats to buy. So I knew this was going on. This is why I wanted these figures. So when I got all this, Bill and I come back and presented it to Les Crofton and said, what are we going to do with it? And Les Crofton, in his wisdom, said, Lyle, we won't do anything with it because some of our members are going to be involved here, and if we expose this, people are going to get the sack. So nothing happened for some time, and then the newspapers published a thing in the paper, and there was a big inquiry, and a fella faced court, and that bloke that was selling the seats, he ended up getting out of it, but a bloke done time over it, and there was a lot of money involved and everything, yeah. So that was something that I was involved in that blew up afterwards, and I'm glad it didn't blow up directly from what I'd done. So, is that interesting or not? You can cut it. You can cut it out.
That's not getting publicly played. No. Don't worry about that one.
No.
That is definitely something that we keep. That is absolutely something where some uni student comes in and goes, "Oh, I want to do. I'm doing my thesis on the history of the railways." It's like, okay, here's the last thing, and it's like, here's a story. Maybe there's a line that you could find, about graft and the old Queensland Railways you could go through.
I've still got at home the headlining out of the paper when the bloke was charged and everything. Yeah.
So, but were there any like big blues that you fought? Like anything that you remember? Any funny industrial action that you guys took. Because, you know, for us in the modern day union movement, industrial actions are, you know, it's jumping through flaming hoops, really.
Yeah, a lot of times you didn't have to do it. It was a threat. It was a threat. I remember John Jeffcoat. He was a chief mechanical engineer, and when the electric train started in Brisbane, and the electric trains were running, and they finished up a bit of a blue over a demarcation dispute, and we end up having a meeting with John Jeffcoat over it, and Bob Bradshaw was there at the time, and Bob Bradshaw said, "Well, John, if you go ahead with that, there won't be any electric trains leave the electric shed," he said, "because we've got all the guards, and there'll be no guards will work an electric train if you go ahead with that decision." And the threat worked. He withdrew what he was going to do, and it didn't happen. So it wasn't the actual taken action, it was the threat. And of course the threat was real at that time because, and probably still today, the RTBU control most of the guards, have most of the guards.
And how did you...
And that was another thing that Trevor was involved in, was of course retaining guards and what have you, because he had a big blue. I'm sure John McCarthy has talked about this with the DOO and all that sort of thing, but initially they didn't want guards to be driver's assistants or anything, but Trevor fought hard for it, and so did other people in the union, to make sure that guards were eligible, and then eventually that guards were kept on the trains, you know. You know, they had a big campaign at one stage to eliminate the guards, but they found that a lot of the curb platforms and everything that we had weren't suitable to have a camera to enable the camera to give right away. They still had to retain the guard. I can remember Bob Bradshaw saying to guards, "Get out and do your job. You want to keep your job, get out and help the people on the train. Get out and do your job." He was a wild man at times.
So how did you decide to become a leader in the union?
I don't know. I don't know. It's probably something that just fell into place, you know. From the early days, the early days in the Ipswich Railway workshops as an apprentice, there was 3,000 men working there. Things were tough. I wrote I can remember writing an article, and I called it Down Memory Lane for the Advocate. And I can remember Pat Dunn was retired at the time, and Pat Dunn rang me up and he said, "Keep it up, Lyle, that's good stuff," you know. And it was just par for the course then. I can remember writing about it, how you worked in a shop, and that's where you worked all day, and when the whistle went, your bag was hanging up on the wall or there, and you got your lunch out of your bag, and you sat down on the floor and you had your lunch there. There was no lunch rooms, there was no refrigerators, there was no cold water. The only cold water we had was what they'd made in the workshops, and they had a circular cold water all set in a wire frame, packed up with Coke, and then a tray around the top that had all holes in it, and you turn the tap on with one of those round things that you could drink out of, and what spilled down dripped down through these holes and dripped down through the Coke, and that's what kept the water cool. That's how you got your in summer when stinking hot, hey. Yep.
When you were starting your path, as a leader in the union, what did you set out to achieve? Like, what were you trying to do? What do you want to see? What did you want to see the union do?
Well, what I really tried to do we used to have, there was a lot of men worked in the area, and we used to have smoko meetings and that. And I spent a lot of time telling people what was happening in the union. And a lot of people I were talking to were members of other unions. And why I'd done that is I tried to convince them that this was the best union to be in rail. Craft unions, there was no point in it, you know, and I was successful. I did increase our union membership substantially at Maine from when I went there to when I finished.
Did you have any fears when you were, when you were younger in the union movement? Anything you were really worried about? No, there was bullies in other unions and everything, but I never had any. I had never any occasion to be bullied or attempted to be bullied by anybody. You know, it did go on, I know, but I must admit I had a good working relationship with metal workers members, and yeah, I probably a low-key union fella I was, but probably in one way I was respected by the other unions. I didn't tell lies and I didn't go out of my way to rob people. I just told them the truth, what was happening, and if they wanted to change union, that was up to them. I didn't go trying to poach them, but I did manage to get them. And what is the most important that you would say you experienced or had a hand in?
Well, yeah, the most important thing was going to National Council. I was workshops and running sheds representative in the National Council. And when we met down there, I said to him, look, this is outdated, this workshops and running sheds thing. There's a lot of changes going to happen in rail, and we need to change our name so that we can cover future people to be able to sign them up into rail. So we agonised over that, and I said, well, the next meeting we'll come up with a name change. So I spent a lot of time going backwards and forwards from Ipswich to Maine in the train, writing down different things to come out with a name that covered us, which I did. It come up that we become Fleet Overhaul Maintenance and Service Division. So I wanted to cover the overhaul, or manufacture, overhaul, maintenance and service division. I covered everything from making trains to servicing them to so as to be able to cover trams and all this sort of thing. And of course it went through National Council, and that's what it is today. And I know it's been beneficial because we've signed up people out at Wulkuraka, it probably helped a lot to have that we had the right words. We didn't have workshops and running sheds, because the workshops had it and the running sheds had it. So I was ahead of my time. So I suppose that's my best accomplishment. Happy with that?
And what would you say to future union activists and young unionists? If you just wanted to say one message to them, what would it be?
Solidarity, stay strong.
And what do you see in the future for the union and the labour movement as a greater body?
Well, I think the labour movement, Labour Day is a good example. Every year that I've been, it's got bigger and bigger. It's, I know union membership's fallen generally, but times change. When you think back to work choices, things were going to look pretty grim, but it turned out for the best, really. The Liberal government's still frightened to mention the word work choices, hey? So we had a significant victory there, and, our future lies with Labor governments, not with Liberal governments, the way I see it. I hope younger people see it the same way.
And what do you see for the future of the union? What are we?
Well, I think the union's got the right idea. Probably when Owen took over, there was some significant changes in the union structure from, say, Pat Dunn's time through Owen's term, and now this new era. And hopefully the Retired Members Association should get bigger and better. I hope that more retired people take an interest in the union and what's happening and what the future holds. Maybe I won't live long enough to see it, but I just hope it continues. I know it fell through in New South Wales, the Retired Members Association, but if we can get people to keep turning up to meetings and Labor Day marches and things like that, particularly retired people can put the shirt on. They don't have to knock off work, and they can go down to a protest meeting and what have you and fly the flag, and they're not knocking off work and they're not getting threatened with the sack, and we're still showing the flag.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to add? You want to spiel about?
What can I say? Going back to Trevor and my report that I wrote, he had a huge input in creating the special edition of the ARU Advocate in August 1986, celebrating 100 years of service, and I supplied a copy of that to the union that I've had. He had huge successes with the Workers' Compensation Board. The claims spanned many years, and he was highly respected by doctors and the legal people on that board. And I can remember John McCarthy had to fill in for him and go to a meeting one time when he was sick, and the meeting never got underway until they all inquired about Trevor's health over that. He was that loved in that area, they were very concerned about him. Yeah. So, I think I've covered everything, except sadly, Trevor's pensioner father was murdered in his Brisbane home for his winnings from the local TAB. Trevor hoped the killer would be apprehended before he passed on. Sadly, that did not happen. That'll do me, hey?
Yeah, that'll do you.